The Arizona sun hung low and fierce, turning the desert sky into a blazing sheet of gold. The air shimmered with heat. Even the distant mountains looked as if they were melting into the horizon. A hawk cried somewhere above, its call echoing across the endless wilderness. Riding through the dry plains was Tala, a young Apache woman of striking grace. Her hair, long and black as night, flowed behind her as she rode her horse, a strong chestnut mare named Kiona. Tala wore a simple deerskin dress, and her wrists were adorned with turquoise beads that caught the sunlight like bits of sky. She was returning from visiting her tribe's relatives to the south. The journey had been long, but she felt alive beneath the open sky. The rhythm of Kiona's gallop was steady, comforting, a sound she had known since childhood. The earth beneath them pulsed with heat, and each breath carried the scent of dust and wild sage. But the desert was unpredictable. The trail curved around a ridge of red rocks, where shadows danced between the stones. Tala leaned forward, whispering to Kiona in Apache. "Just a little farther, my friend." The horse snorted in reply, her ears twitching as she stepped carefully across the uneven ground. Then, without warning, Kiona stumbled. Her hoof struck a hidden stone buried in the sand. Tala gasped, clutching the reins, but it was too late. The horse reared in pain, and the world tilted sharply. Tala's heart leaped into her throat, and then she fell. The ground rose up to meet her with brutal force. She landed hard, the sharp cry of a broken bone tearing through the silence. Pain shot through her leg like fire. Kiona neighed loudly, frightened, and bolted away, her hooves fading into the distance. For a long time, Tala lay still, her breath ragged, her body trembling from shock. Dust clung to her skin and hair. The sun burned above, merciless and heavy. She tried to move her leg, but agony stopped her cold. Alone in the wide desert with no water and no shade, Tala stared at the horizon and whispered to the wind, "Spirits, guide me." But the only answer was the endless whisper of sand moving across the earth. The sun had already begun its slow descent when Eli Turner spotted something strange in the distance, a flicker of movement against the pale sand. He squinted beneath the brim of his worn hat. At first, he thought it was a coyote or a stray horse, but as he rode closer, he saw the shape of a person lying motionless near a dry creek bed. Eli was a quiet man, a farmer who lived alone on the edge of the desert, his nearest neighbor 10 miles away. He had long since grown used to silence, the kind that wrapped around him at dusk when the wind sighed through the mesquite trees. But what he saw that day made his heart lurch. "Miss, can you hear me?" he called, jumping off his horse. The woman stirred slightly, her lips dry and cracked. Sweat and dust streaked her face, but her eyes, dark, fierce, and full of life, met his. "My horse," she whispered weakly. It ran. Eli knelt beside her and gently touched her forehead. "You're hurt." "Don't move." He looked down at her leg and winced. It was badly swollen. "The angle wrong." "You've broken it," he murmured. Without waiting for permission, he lifted her carefully into his arms. She was light, but he could feel her tense with pain as she tried not to cry out. He mounted his horse with her cradled against his chest and turned toward his farm, urging the animal into a steady gallop. The ride back was long, the sun dipping behind the hills. By the time they reached his small wooden cabin, the first stars had begun to appear. Eli carried her inside, laid her gently on a bed covered with a wool blanket, and hurried to fetch water. When he returned, Tala was awake again, her gaze wary. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice hoarse but proud. Eli knelt beside her, wringing out a cool cloth. "Because you needed it," he said simply. "Out here we only have each other." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. As he bandaged her leg by lantern light, the desert outside fell silent. Two strangers, bound by chance, had crossed paths, and something unspoken began to stir between them. Morning light filtered softly through the small cabin window, painting golden stripes across the rough wooden floor. The desert outside was still, silent except for the distant call of a mourning dove. Tala lay on the bed, her leg carefully bandaged, the scent of wild herbs drifting through the air. Eli Turner moved quietly around the room. He had built this cabin with his own hands, every nail, every board. Now for the first time in years, there was someone else inside it. He poured warm water into a basin and crushed dried sage and yarrow, mixing them into a paste. "My mother taught me this," he said, glancing at Tala. "It helps bones mend faster." Tala nodded faintly. "Your mother was wise," she murmured. Her voice was soft, but carried the calm strength of her people. "Among my tribe, we use willow bark for pain." Eli smiled. "Guess the desert gives us both what we need." Days passed slowly. Eli tended to his fields by day and returned to the cabin each evening to check on Tala. Sometimes he brought her wildflowers, sometimes stories. He spoke of his childhood in the far green hills, of how he came west looking for a new start after the war took everything he knew. Tala listened quietly, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. In return, she told him of her people, how the stars were the eyes of ancestors, how the wind carried the voices of those who had gone before. Her words were poetry, rich and ancient. As her strength returned, she began to move about the cabin with crutches Eli carved from smooth cedar branches. Together they shared meals of cornbread, beans, and roasted cactus fruit. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, the two sat side by side outside the cabin, watching the moon rise over the desert. There were no promises, no confessions, only the quiet understanding that grew between them. When he helped her walk, their hands brushed, and for a heartbeat both paused, feeling something neither could name. Under the vast desert sky, a bond was forming, tender, fragile, and real. Neither of them knew how long it would last. But in those quiet evenings, the loneliness that had once filled Eli's heart began to fade, replaced by something far more dangerous: hope. The morning came quiet and pale, the desert bathed in a gentle gold light. A thin mist clung to the sagebrush, and the air smelled of rain, rare and sweet. Tala stood by the open door of the cabin, her hand resting lightly on the wooden frame. Her leg had healed enough for her to walk without the crutches, though a faint limp still marked her steps. Eli stood a few paces behind her, watching her in silence. He had known this day would come, but knowing did not make it easier. For weeks, he had grown used to the sound of her voice in the evenings, the soft rustle of her movements in the cabin, the quiet peace she brought into his lonely world. Now the thought of her leaving left a hollow ache inside him. From beyond the horizon came a sound, a low, familiar whinny. Tala's heart lifted as she saw her horse, Kiona, approaching through the dust. Guided perhaps by instinct or by something deeper, she stepped forward slowly, her eyes glistening. "She found me," she whispered. "The spirits brought her back." Eli helped her saddle the horse, his hands steady, though his heart trembled. "You're strong again," he said quietly. "Stronger than when I found you." Tala looked at him, her dark eyes soft but unreadable. "You gave me more than healing, Eli. You gave me kindness." She hesitated, searching for words. "In my people's way, when someone saves your life, their spirit walks beside yours forever." He swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "Then I guess I'll never walk alone again," he managed, his voice low. A smile touched her lips, brief, gentle, and full of meaning. She reached out, touching his rough hand with her smooth one. "You have a good heart. Take care of it." Eli nodded, but his throat was too tight for words. He helped her mount Kiona, then stepped back as she turned the horse toward the horizon. For a long moment, Tala looked back. The rising sun framed her silhouette, proud, radiant, and free. Then she gave a soft command, and Kiona began to move, her hooves stirring the golden dust. Eli stood there until the desert swallowed her figure completely. The silence returned, but it was different now, not empty, not lonely. Somewhere in that silence her spirit remained.